Okay, so today I want to talk about a country that almost nobody in Western media is discussing seriously, and I find this very strange, because if you look at this war carefully, if you really look at what is happening structurally, this country is right at the center of everything. It brokered the ceasefire, it hosted the peace talks, it has military ties with both Washington and Tehran, and it is a nuclear power. I am talking about Pakistan. Okay, now I want to be very clear about something before we start. When I say Pakistan is the most dangerous country in this war, I do not mean Pakistan is trying to cause danger. I mean Pakistan is in the most dangerous position. There is a big difference. Pakistan is a nuclear-armed country that is being squeezed from both sides simultaneously, by the United States on one side and by the consequences of this war on the other. And when you squeeze a nuclear power from both sides, the risks become very, very difficult to calculate. So today, I want to use our framework, game theory, structural history, and the four dimensions of war to explain exactly what Pakistan's position means, what it means for this war, what it means for the region, and what it means for the world. Okay, so let's begin. First, I want to tell you a story, because I think this story captures Pakistan's situation perfectly. Think about a man who lives between two very powerful, very angry neighbors. Both neighbors are in a fight with each other. Both neighbors come to this man and say, "We need your help." Now, this man is not a weak person. He has a gun. Actually, he has nuclear weapons. But his house is also very fragile economically. His family depends on remittances from people working in the Gulf. His fuel comes through the Persian Gulf. His food prices are rising every day because of this war. And now, both of his powerful neighbors are knocking on his door at the same time. That is Pakistan right now. And the question I want to answer today is, what does this man do, and what happens to everyone else if he makes the wrong choice? Okay, so let's go through the facts first, because in my analysis, I always start with facts before I give you interpretation, okay? So here is what actually happened. On the 8th of April, 2026, just a few weeks ago, Pakistan brokered a ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Think about what this means. A nuclear war was potentially building up. Trump had posted on Truth Social, and I want you to understand how serious this was. Trump posted, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." The Secretary General of Amnesty International said, "This statement may constitute a threat of genocide." Multiple Democrats called for invoking the 25th Amendment. People around the world genuinely believed nuclear weapons were being considered. And, in the middle of all of this, Pakistan stepped in. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir, who is the army chief and the most powerful man in Pakistan, personally negotiated a ceasefire framework based on a 10-point Iranian proposal. And it worked, at least temporarily. Then, on April 11th, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, flew to Islamabad with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, a 300-member delegation. They sat face-to-face with Iranian representatives for 21 hours. This was the highest-level direct meeting between America and Iran since the 1979 revolution. And where did it happen? Not in Geneva, not in Vienna, not in Qatar, in Islamabad. Okay, so this is remarkable. This is historically remarkable. Pakistan, a country that does not even formally recognize Israel, became the host, the mediator, and the guarantor of the most important diplomatic process of the 21st century. And almost nobody in Western media is asking the deep question, why Pakistan? And what does it cost Pakistan to be in this position? Let me answer both of those questions. Why Pakistan? Okay, let's use game theory to understand this. In any negotiation, you need a mediator that both sides trust. And here is the problem with this war. There is almost nobody that both America and Iran trust at the same time. Let me go through the obvious candidates. Qatar. Qatar has been used before, but Qatar is a GCC member. It hosts American military bases, and Iran has complicated feelings about Qatar's relationship with the Gulf states. Also, Qatar was struck by Iranian-aligned forces earlier in this war, not the ideal neutral ground. Turkey. Turkey is interesting. Turkey is a NATO member, which gives it credibility with America, and Turkey has maintained economic ties with Iran. But Turkey and America have a complicated relationship right now, and Turkey's role in the region makes it a somewhat interested party rather than a neutral one. China. China is Iran's biggest oil customer. China has invested over $100 billion in Iran's energy infrastructure. China has obvious interest in ending this war because the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is hurting China's supply chain. But America does not trust China right now. In fact, Trump accused China of sending weapons to Iran during this war. So China cannot be a neutral mediator from America's perspective. Russia, even more obvious problem. America and Russia are deeply adversarial right now. So who is left? Who has military ties with Iran's Revolutionary Guards? Because you need to talk to the IRGC, not just the government. And who also has a relationship warm enough with Trump that Trump calls them his favorite field marshal. Pakistan. Specifically, Field Marshal Asim Munir. This man has personal relationships with Iran's military leadership because Pakistan and Iran share a border and have decades of military-to-military contact. And at the same time, he has built a personal rapport with Donald Trump. Trump genuinely likes this man, and in Trump's world, personal relationships are everything. So this is why Pakistan, not because Pakistan is the obvious choice, but because Pakistan is the only choice. And that is actually a very dangerous position to be in. Now, let me explain why this position is so dangerous for Pakistan. And I want to use a historical analogy here, because historical analogies are how we understand structural patterns. Think about the city of Constantinople in the late Byzantine period. Constantinople was the most important city in the world for trade because it sat at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Every major power needed Constantinople. The Venetians needed it, the Genoese needed it, the Crusaders needed it, the Ottoman Turks needed it. And for a while, the Byzantines were able to play all these powers against each other and maintain their position. But here is what eventually happened. Constantinople became so important to so many powers that it could no longer remain neutral. Everyone wanted to control it, and eventually the Ottomans took it in 1453, and the Byzantine Empire was finished. Now, I am not saying Pakistan will be destroyed. Okay, that is not the analogy. The analogy is this. When you become the indispensable crossroads, when everyone needs you, that is not necessarily a position of strength. That is a position of dangerous exposure, because now everyone wants to influence you, everyone wants to pressure you, everyone wants to use you. And if you fail to deliver what the big powers want, they will stop protecting you. Pakistan is the new Constantinople of this war. Everyone needs Pakistan, but that means everyone is also pressuring Pakistan, and Pakistan has very limited room to maneuver. Okay, now I want to give you the structural analysis of Pakistan's position. And I want to use the 4 dimensions of war that I always talk about: military, economic, political, and narrative. Let us start with the economic dimension, because this is where Pakistan is most immediately vulnerable. Pakistan imports nearly 80% of its oil. 80%! And a significant portion of this comes from the Gulf region, which means it passes through or near the Strait of Hormuz, the very strait that Iran has closed. So, from the day this war started, Pakistan's energy costs began rising immediately. Transportation costs in Pakistani cities have doubled. Industrial electricity bills have surged. Inflation, which was already above 40% in Pakistan in 2025, is getting worse. Small businesses are struggling. Ordinary families are struggling. And then there is the remittances problem. Pakistan has millions of workers in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Kuwait, in Qatar. These workers send money home every month. This is not a small thing. Remittances are one of Pakistan's largest sources of foreign exchange. If the Gulf economies are destabilized by this war, if Saudi Arabia is threatened, if UAE is hit, if the Gulf states start contracting, then Pakistani workers lose jobs, and Pakistani families lose income, and Pakistan's economy, which is already fragile, becomes even more fragile. So Pakistan has a direct economic interest in ending this war as fast as possible. But here is the problem. The faster Pakistan tries to end this war, the more it has to pressure Iran to make concessions, and pressuring Iran has its own costs. Now, let us look at the political dimension, and this is where it gets really complicated. Pakistan's domestic politics are extremely fractured right now. You have a government led by Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, but you also have Imran Khan sitting in prison and a large part of the Pakistani population that supports him. And among that population, and among many ordinary Pakistanis, regardless of which political party they support, there is strong sympathy for Iran and for the Palestinian cause. Pakistanis are a Muslim-majority country. They watch what is happening in Iran. They watch what is happening in Gaza. They have feelings about this. So when Field Marshal Asim Munir, who is effectively the most powerful man in Pakistan right now, sits in a room with J.D. Vance and works to broker a deal that could be seen as pressuring Iran, there is domestic political risk. Pakistani public opinion does not like the idea of Pakistan being used as an instrument of American pressure on a Muslim country. That is a political landmine. At the same time, Pakistan cannot afford to alienate America. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. The United States has always been deeply concerned about the security of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. America provides financial support to Pakistan. The IMF, which Pakistan desperately needs for economic survival, is heavily influenced by American votes. If Pakistan loses American goodwill, the economic consequences could be severe. So, Pakistan is caught. It needs America's economic support and goodwill, but it cannot afford to be seen by its own population or by Iran as doing America's dirty work. This is the political squeeze. Now let us look at the military dimension, and this is where things become truly serious. Pakistan is a nuclear power. It has somewhere between 160 and 170 nuclear warheads, making it one of the larger nuclear arsenals in the world. And Pakistan's nuclear doctrine is different from America's or Russia's. Pakistan has what strategists call a first-use policy, meaning Pakistan explicitly does not rule out using nuclear weapons first if it faces an existential threat. Now, why is this relevant to the Iran war? Let me explain. Pakistan shares a long border with Iran. Any escalation of this war into Pakistani territory, any American military activity that spills over into Pakistan's airspace, any Iranian pressure that makes Pakistan feel threatened, immediately brings a nuclear power into direct contact with the most dangerous war since World War. And here is something I want you to really think about. The reason Pakistan is in this mediating role is precisely because it has these military and nuclear credentials. Iran talks to Pakistan partly because Pakistan is a fellow nuclear power. Iran knows that Pakistan understands what it means to be threatened with nuclear annihilation. This is part of why the relationship between Pakistan and Iran's IRGC has depth. There's a shared understanding of what it means to be a smaller nuclear power in a world dominated by much larger nuclear powers. But this also means that if the talks fail, if the ceasefire completely collapses, Pakistan's position becomes extraordinarily dangerous. Because Pakistan will be a nuclear power sitting right next to an active war zone with a fragile economy, a divided domestic politics, and pressure from both sides of the conflict. This is not a stable configuration. Let me now talk about the narrative dimension, because I think this is the most underappreciated aspect of Pakistan's role. Think about what Pakistan has achieved through this mediation. Iran's ambassador in Islamabad said something very interesting. He said, "We will do talks in Pakistan and nowhere else because we trust Pakistan." Think about that. Iran, which has been at war, which has been bombed, which has lost its supreme leader, which does not trust the United States, which does not trust Israel, which is deeply suspicious of every Gulf state, Iran trusts Pakistan. That is enormous diplomatic capital. And Washington Post ran a story that captures the strangeness of this perfectly. The headline was something like, "A nuclear-armed power that does not recognize Israel has secured a high-profile role in the Iran war." They were pointing out the paradox. Pakistan is not a Western ally in the traditional sense. Pakistan does not recognize Israel. Pakistan became a nuclear power in secret. And yet, Pakistan is now the indispensable mediator of the most dangerous war on earth. That is a remarkable narrative achievement. But here is the other side of this narrative. If the talks fail, if Pakistan cannot deliver a deal, then Pakistan gets blamed. If Iran walks away from the table, America will look for someone to blame, and the easiest target is the mediator who could not deliver. Pakistan could go from being the world's most important peacemaker to being accused of enabling Iran's refusal to negotiate. That is a narrative trap, and right now the situation is very tense. The first round of Islamabad talks in April ended without any agreement after 21 hours of negotiations. The two core issues, Iran's nuclear program and control of the Strait of Hormuz, remained completely unresolved. Then Trump imposed a naval blockade on Iran 2 days after the talks failed. Iran called the blockade unlawful, and Iran said it would not return to the negotiating table while the blockade continued. So, Pakistan is now trying to convince Iran to come back, while America is simultaneously making it harder for Iran to justify coming back. Pakistan is being squeezed from both sides in the narrative space as well. Okay, now I want to use game theory to think about what happens next, because I think this is where the analysis gets most interesting. In game theory, there is a concept called the prisoner's dilemma. The basic idea is this. Two players are each faced with a choice. If both cooperate, they both get a medium reward. If one betrays the other while the other cooperates, the betrayer gets a big reward and the cooperator gets punished. If both betray each other, they both get the worst outcome. The problem with the prisoner's dilemma is that in a single game, if you cannot communicate with the other player and you cannot trust them, the rational strategy is to betray. Because if the other side betrays and you cooperated, you get the worst outcome. So you betray to protect yourself. But when the prisoner's dilemma is played repeatedly, When it is not a one-shot game but an ongoing relationship, the rational strategy changes. In a repeated game, cooperation is more rational because you have to deal with the other player again next time. Now, apply this to Pakistan's situation. Pakistan is playing a repeated game with both America and Iran. It has to deal with both of them long after this war ends. So Pakistan's rational strategy is to cooperate, to be genuinely neutral, genuinely helpful, even when it is difficult, because Pakistan needs both relationships to survive long-term. But here is the catch. America is playing this as a one-shot game. America's attitude is, get Iran to surrender now. That is the only goal. Everything else is secondary. And Trump, in particular, has demonstrated repeatedly that he does not think in terms of long-term relationships. He thinks in terms of immediate deals and immediate wins. So, you have Pakistan trying to play a sophisticated long-term cooperative strategy, while America is playing a short-term maximum pressure strategy. And these two approaches are fundamentally incompatible, and that incompatibility is creating friction in the mediation process right now. Now, let me make my prediction. And as always, I want to be clear, this is not prophecy. This is game theory and structural history. I could be wrong, but this is what the patterns suggest. Pakistan is in a position that I would call the mercenary trap, okay? I have talked about the mercenary trap before in the context of Israel and America, but let me apply it to Pakistan now. The mercenary trap works like this. A powerful empire needs someone to do its difficult work. In this case, diplomacy with an enemy the empire cannot talk to directly. They hire a mercenary, in this case, Pakistan. The mercenary does the work, but in doing the work, the mercenary exposes itself to all the risks that the empire wanted to avoid. The mercenary takes the blame when things go wrong. The mercenary is pressured and squeezed, and if the mercenary cannot deliver, the empire abandons it and finds someone else. Pakistan accepted this role because it needed the money, the goodwill, and the geopolitical status that comes from being the indispensable mediator. But in accepting this role, Pakistan has put itself in the middle of a conflict between a declining empire and a resilient civilization. And history tells us this is not a safe place to be. What I think will happen is this. Talks will continue, probably for weeks or months. There will be more rounds. The ceasefire will be extended repeatedly. Pakistan will keep trying, and in the short term, Pakistan's role protects it. As long as talks are ongoing, both America and Iran need Pakistan. So, Pakistan is safe. But the dangerous moment comes if the talks completely and permanently collapse. If America decides to escalate massively, to go for a ground invasion, to destroy Iranian critical infrastructure, and the ceasefire dies, at that point, Pakistan loses its mediating role. Pakistan becomes just another country on the border of an active war zone. And then, the vulnerabilities I described, the economic dependence on Gulf remittances, the domestic political instability, the nuclear weapons sitting next to a war, all of those become acute simultaneously. And let me end with one more thought, because I think this connects to the biggest structural question of this war. We have talked in previous lectures about how this war is really about the replacement of the American empire, how different powers are positioning themselves for a post-American Middle East. And in that context, Pakistan's role is fascinating. Pakistan is a Muslim-majority nuclear power. It has ties to China through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, one of the most important Belt and Road projects. It has historical ties to America through decades of alliance. It has cultural and religious ties to Iran and to the broader Muslim world. And it has demonstrated in this crisis that it has a unique ability to communicate with all sides simultaneously. In the post-American Middle East that I believe is emerging from this war, there will need to be a regional security architecture. Someone will need to help manage the relationship between the two regional powers that I believe will emerge, Israel and Iran. And interestingly, Pakistan is one of the few countries that has credibility with Iran, while also being capable of speaking with Israel's allies. So there is a version of this story where Pakistan comes out of this war stronger, where Pakistan's mediation role becomes permanent, where Pakistan becomes the Switzerland of the new Middle East, a neutral, trusted broker that all sides need. And given Pakistan's nuclear status, its geographic position, and its unique set of relationships, this is actually not an implausible outcome. But there is also a version where Pakistan gets crushed, where the talks collapse, the war escalates, the Gulf economies implode, Pakistani remittances dry up, domestic politics explodes, and Pakistan enters a period of severe instability, potentially the worst since its founding. And that version, with a nuclear-armed Pakistan in severe internal crisis sitting next to an active regional war, is one of the most dangerous scenarios anyone can imagine. So, when I say Pakistan is the most dangerous country in this war, this is what I mean. Not because Pakistan is threatening anyone, but because Pakistan's situation contains within it the potential for outcomes, both very good and very bad, that could reshape the entire world. Okay, so that is my analysis for today. I want to emphasize once more, this is structural analysis. This is game theory. It is not prophecy. Keep your minds open. Look at the evidence. Test this framework against what you see in the news. But I think once you start watching Pakistan closely, once you start watching what Field Marshal Asim Munir is doing, who he is meeting, what Pakistan's foreign ministry is saying, you will see exactly what I mean. This is the story nobody is covering, and it may turn out to be the most important story of the entire war. Okay?